Ida B. Wells. How do y'all know who Rosa Parks is, but y'all don't know who Ida B. Wells is? This is Rosa Parks times 10. This is Rosa Parks on steroids. R.I.P. Rosa Parks, by the way, but this is Ida B. Wells. Let's get right into this. Pioneering voice for justice. Ida B. Wells, 1862 to 1931, stands as one of America's most influential journalists, activists, and champions for racial and general equality. To explore her remarkable life, from her birth into slavery to becoming a fearless investigative reporter who documented lynching and suffrage, who fought for women's voting rights, and a civil rights pioneer whose work laid foundation for social justice movements that will follow. Through personal adversity in the face of dangerous opposition, Wells created an enduring legacy of courage and truth-telling that continues to inspire activists and journalists today. Early life and education. Ida B. Wells was born into slavery on July 16, 1862, in Holly Springs, Mississippi, just months before President Abraham Lincoln issued an Emancipation Proclamation. Her parents, James and Elizabeth Wells, were enslaved until the proclamation took effect. So let me give y'all some groundwork. So around this time, she was born 3 years before what they call the Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era was from about 1865 to 1877. Y'all can fact check me, but I'm pretty sure I got that right. And this was what it sounds like, coming right out of slavery at this point. Her enslavement until the proclamation took effect, after which her father became involved in the Reconstruction era politics while working as a carpenter. So another thing, man, when I write up these presentations, I write them like a week in advance, so sometimes interject things if I didn't already put it in there. Her mother was known in the community as a renowned cook, and her father was also a carpenter. The Wells family valued education immensely. Ida's father served on the board of Russ University, now Russ College, a freedmen's school established in Holly Springs by Northern Methodist missionaries. Ida attended this institution where she developed strong reading and writing skills. The education she received at Russ laid the intellectual foundation for her future work as a journalist and activist. Tragedy struck the Wells family in 1878, so this was a year after Reconstruction, I'm pretty sure, when a yellow fever epidemic swept through Holly Springs. Both of Ida's parents and her infant brother died in the outbreak, sadly. At age 16 years old, Ida refused to allow her 5 surviving siblings to be separated and sent to various foster homes. Displaying the determination that would characterize her entire life, she convinced a local school administrator that she was 18 so she could take a teaching position in a rural school to support her family. Whew. The experience of being suddenly thrust into the role of family protector and provider at such a young age forged Wells' resilience and independent spirit. She continued her own education while teaching, taking classes during the summer at Fisk University in Nashville. This period of her life demonstrated not only her intellectual abilities, but also her extraordinary commitment to family and her willingness to defy conventions when necessary, traits that would later define her activism. The Memphis years, from teacher to journalist. In 1882, Ida B. Wells relocated to Memphis, Tennessee with her 2 youngest sisters, seeking better teaching opportunities in the city's expanding school system for black children. She quickly secured a position at the school in Woodstock, just outside Memphis, and continued her own education during summers at Fisk University. Her intellect and dedication to education earned her respect in Memphis' African American community, where she began an active member of literary and social clubs. Wells' transformation from educator to journalist began almost accidentally. She started writing articles for church publications and local black newspapers, including The Living Way. Her early pieces focused on each affecting the black community and often challenged prevailing racial attitudes. Her sharp, direct writing styles and willingness to address controversial topics quickly distinguished her voice among black writers of the period. 1884. An incident occurred that would profoundly change Wells' life and career trajectory. While riding that first-class train cars for which she had purchased a ticket, Wells was forcibly removed when she refused to move to the segregated colored cars. Rather than accepting the this injustice, she sued the Chempesky, Ohio and Southwestern Railroad Company. Initially, she won her case and was awarded $500. $500 was a lot back then in the local circuit court, a remarkable legal victory for a black woman in that era. 1887, and I'm pretty sure that case they like reneged on it. I don't think I put this in this presentation, but I'm pretty sure they reneged on that. 1887, the railroad company appealed to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which reversed the decision. This devastating legal setback catalyzed Wells' commitment to fighting injustice through journalism. She wrote about her experience for the living way, marking her first published account of personal confrontation with racial discrimination. 1889, Wells became co-owner and editor of Free Speech and Headline, a black-owned newspaper in Memphis. This position gave her an independent platform to express her increasingly radical critiques of racial injustice. She balanced teaching with journalism until 1891, when she was fired from her teaching position after publishing an article critical of the conditions in black schools. 1891 to 1892. Freed from educational employment constraints, Wells devoted herself fully to journalism. She transformed from a part-time writer to one of the most fearless investigative journalists of her era, using her newspaper to document and challenge the racial and gender discrimination post-Reconstruction South. I'm not sure if I put this in here, but it was an incident where she wouldn't back down. I think she had like one or two like revolvers or whatnot on her. I can't remember. I had to find the article because for Black History Month next year, I'm probably gonna do a revision on this. You know what I mean? During these formative Memphis years, Wells developed the journalistic skills, fearless approach to controversy, and committed to factual reporting that will characterize her groundbreaking anti-lynching investigations. Her experience in Memphis, both personal indignities and professional evolution, prepared her to become a singular voice against one of the most horrific practices in American history. Anti-lynching crusade. The catalyst for Ida B. Wells' most significant work came in March 1892, when three of her friends, Thomas Mose, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart, were brutally lynched in Memphis. These men were successful business owners who had opened the People's Groceries, which competed with the white-owned store nearby. After a confrontation with white competitors escalated, the three black businessmen were arrested. Before they could stand trial, a white mob dragged them from jail and murdered them. Goodness gracious, right? A white mob dragged them from jail and unalived them. The lynching was not based on common false accusation of sexual assault against a white woman, but clearly motivated by economic competition, revealing the often economic motivations behind racial violence. Devastated and outraged, Wells channeled her grief into a journalistic investigation of unprecedented scope. Using her newspaper, Free Speech and Headlight, she urged black residents to leave Memphis, writing, "There is only one thing left to do, save our money and leave a town which will neither protect our lives and property nor give us a fair trial." Estimated 6,000 African Americans heeded her call, dealing a significant economic blow to the city as black consumers took their business elsewhere. Revolutionary right there. Investigative reporting. Wells embarked on a systematic investigation of lynching throughout South, traveling to sites of racial killings, interviewing witnesses, and gathering statistical data. Her research shattered the common justification that lynching was a response to sexual assault on white women. Her findings demonstrated that less than one-third of lynching victims were even accused of rape, with many like her friends targeted for economic success or other violations of racial hierarchy. Publication of findings. In May 1892, Wells published her most explosive editorial, directly challenging the myth of the black male rapist. She suggested that many cases where rape was alleged, the relationships had actually been consensual. This extraordinary, dangerous claim that white women might voluntarily engage in relationships with black men enraged white Memphians. While Wells was traveling in New York, a mob destroyed her newspaper office and threatened to unalive her if she returned. Documented evidence. Unable to return to Memphis, Wells began publishing her findings in pamphlet form. Her first major work, Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All Its Phases, 1892. Presenting her research with journalistic precision, she allowed with the Red Record, 1895. which expanded her documentation of lynching throughout the United States. These works represented the first systematic analysis of lynching, complete with statistical data and detailed case studies. Public advocacy. Wells transformed her journalism into a platform for advocacy, speaking extensively about her findings and callings for federal anti-lynching legislation. She directly linked lynching to the broader system of racial control in the post-Reconstruction South. So, of course, when we say post, that means after, right? Arguing was a tool for maintaining white supremacy through terror. Well's anti-lynching crusade revolutionized investigative journalism by combining rigorous data collection with compelling narrative accounts of individual cases. She risked her life to document a brutal practice that many Americans prefer to ignore or justify. Her works represented the first sustained challenge to lynching as an accepted practice and established a template for civil rights advocacy that combined factual documentation with moral outrage and calls for specific policy remedies. Nation and international activism. Forced into exile from Memphis, Ida B. Wells transformed her personal displacement into a platform for expanded activism. She moved to New York briefly before settling in Chicago, which would become her permanent home. Rather than silencing her voice, her forced relocation amplified it, allowing her to build national and international coalitions against racial violence and discrimination. In the early 1890s, Wells embarked on a series of speaking tours across the northern United States, bringing her anti-lynching message to white and black audience alike. Her presentations combined statistical evidence with powerful narrative of specific lynchings, created a compelling case that lynching was not sporadic vigilante justice by a systematic tool of racial terror. These lectures were often controversial, with some venues canceling her appearance due to pressure from those who found her message to be too radical. While Wells encountered resistance in some quarters, she also found crucial allies. Frederick Douglass became an important supporter, collaborating with her on pamphlets and speaking engagements. Her growing reputation led to invitations from British reformers, resulting in two expanded speaking tours of Great Britain in 1893 and 1894. These international tours proved tremendously significant, as British audiences were generally more receptive to her anti-lynching message than many American audience. Wells' British tour generated significant press coverage both in England and the United States. She formed relationships with prominent British reformers and helped establish anti-lynching societies in London. The international attention embarrassed American officials and raised awareness about racial violence in the United States among European audiences. Wells strategically used her British platform to call for economic boycotts against American goods until lynching was addressed, appealing to both moral and economic arguments. Upon returning to the United States, Wells expanded her organizational work. In 1896, she was instrumental in founding the National Association of Colored Women's Club, which became the largest federation of local black women's organization. While continuing her anti-lynching work, she became increasingly involved in the broader civil rights movement, recognizing that lynching was just one manifestation of a comprehensive system of racial oppression. Though Wells had complicated relationships with some early civil rights organizations, included occasional tension with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, what we know as, right? After its founding in 1909, her investigative work and activism helped establish the intellectual and strategic foundations for organized civil rights advocacy. Her insistence on documented injustice was factual precision while speaking boldly about the implications, influence generations of civil rights leaders who followed. Women's suffrage and civil rights. Ida B. Wells recognized early in her career that racial and gender discriminations were interconnected forms of oppression. Her involvement in the women's suffrage movement reflected her comprehensive approach to social justice and her understanding that black women face unique challenges at the intersection of race and gender. However, her experience with the suffrage movement also highlighted the racial tension that complicated coalition building among women activists. After settling in Chicago in the 1890s, Wells became increasingly involved in women organization and suffrage activities. In 1893, she challenged the exclusion of black women from the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, collaborating with Frederick Douglass to publish and distribute a pamphlet titled "The Reason Why the Color America is Not the World's Columbian Exposition." This publication demonstrated her commitment to ensuring black women's voices and achievements were recognized. Alpha Suffrage Club. In 1913, Wells founded the Alpha Suffrage Club, the first black women's suffrage organization in Chicago. The club focused on mobilizing black women for political action and education about voting rights. It represented Wells' understanding that black women needed their own political organization to address their specific concerns. 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade. Wells participated in the 1913 Women's Parade in Washington, D.C. Women's Suffrage Parade in 1913 in Washington, D.C. highlighted the racial tension within the suffrage movement. Parade organizers concerned about alienated Southern supporters asked black women to march at the back of the procession. Wells refused this segregation, famously stepping from the crowd to march alongside a white Illinois delegation when the parade was underway. Legal rights advocacy. Wells advocated for legal protection for black women, recognized that neither race-based nor gender-based protections alone were sufficient. She worked to secure voting rights for women while simultaneously fighting against the enfranchisement of black voters through poll taxes, literacy tests, and violence. Journalism for equality. Throughout her career, Wells used her journalism to highlight issues affecting black women specifically. She wrote about workplace discrimination, sexual harassment, and the particular vulnerability of black women to racial violence. Her writing created a space for discussion issues that were often ignored by both mainstream women's organizations and male-led civil rights groups. Wells maintained complex relationship with prominent white suffragists like Susan B. Anthony. While she collaborated with these leaders on shared goals, she never hesitated to criticize racism within the suffrage movement. She objected strongly when white suffragists suggested supporting women's voting rights by appealing to racial sentiment about countering the impact of black male voters. That's the key. That's the key to pay attention to. If y'all didn't get what I just said there, rewind this. Wells' approach to women's suffrage emphasized that true equality required addressing both racial and gender discrimination simultaneously. She refused to prioritize either aspect of her identity or to accept advances for women that came at the expense of racial progress. Her intersectional approach to activism, though not named as such during her lifetime, anticipated modern feminist theories about interconnected nature of various forms of discrimination. So this is my personal take on it. Some of you at home might be thinking of her like, oh man, she was a feminist. Not quite in this sense. So y'all got to remember, these are the late 1800s, early 1900s. You know what I'm saying? So when it was sexual harassment going on, please believe this was real sexual harassment, not modern times with the catcalling and things of that nature. Understand? Let's move on. After the passage of 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote, Wells continued working to ensure black women could exercise this right in practice. She conducted voter education campaigns through the Alpha Suffrage Club and personally accompanied black women to polling places to help protect their right to vote, recognizing that legal rights meant little without practical ability to exercise them. Personal life and family. Amidst her tireless activism and professional work, Ida B. Wells maintained a rich personal family life that both supported and occasionally complicated her public mission. In 1895, at the age of 33, she married Ferdinand L. Barnett, a prominent attorney, civil rights activist, and founder of Chicago's first black newspaper, The Conservator. Their partnership represented not just personal union, but an alliance of two committed activists with shared values and complementary skills. So this is what nowadays we would say is a power couple. Barnett was a widower with two sons from his previous marriage. When he and Wells married, after their wedding, Wells took the uncommon step of maintaining both her maiden name and her husband's surname, becoming known as Ida B. Wells Barnett, a decision that reflected her independent spirit and established professional identity. Together, the couple had 4 children: Charles, Herman, Ida B. Wells Jr., and Alfreda. Managing a household with 6 children while continuing her demanding public work represented significant challenges. Wells candidly acknowledged these difficulties, writing about the complexities of balancing motherhood with activism at the time when a few women, particularly black women, had the opportunity to pursue public careers after marriage. She temporarily reduced her traveling and speaking engagements during some period of child rearing, but never fully abandoned her activism. Mr. Barnett proved to be a supportive partner who respected his wife's commitment to public service. He often managed household responsibilities to allow Wells to continue her work, an arrangement that was highly unusual for their era. Their marriage demonstrated a remarkable modern understanding of partnership, with both spouses contributing to family life and supporting each other's personal endeavors. Wells' correspondence reveals the personal toll that her dangerous work sometimes took on her family. She received numerous death threats throughout her career, creating anxiety for her husband and children. Despite these pressures, the Barnett home in Chicago became a center for black political and social gatherings, exposing the children to important discussions and influential figures in the civil rights movement. Wells ensured that her children receive excellent education. She involved them in her work when appropriate. Her daughter, Ida B. Wells Jr., sometimes assisted with her mother's research and writings. Wells also used her own experience to guide her children through the challenges of growing up black in America, preparing them to maintain their dignity in the face of discrimination. The support of her family, particularly her husband's willingness to defy gender conventions of their time, enabled Wells to maintain her public voice during an era when marriage and motherhood typically meant the end of a woman's public careers. Her ability to balance family commitments with her activism, though never without struggle, allowed her to extend her influence across decades rather than being limited to her years as a single woman. The Barnett family thus became not just a private support system, but an integral component of Wells' enduring impact on American society. Later years and legacy. Ida B. Wells Barnett remained politically active well into her later years, though her national prominence diminished somewhat as a new civil rights leader emerged. The 1920s found her still engaged in local Chicago politics and continuing to speak out against lynchings and other forms of racial injustice. While younger activists sometimes view her as part of the older generations, Wells never moderated her position or retired from public life. In 1930, at the age of 63, Wells made a bold political move by running as an independent candidate for the Illinois State Senate. Though unsuccessful, her companion highlighted her ongoing commitment to seeking institutional power for the black community. She believed that political representation was essential for achieving lasting change, and her candidacy helped inspire future generation of black political candidates in Chicago and beyond. Which, real quick, man, representation is everything. I told some of my, people that I know in my personal life that if you look outside, you see black kids playing football or they shooting the basketball a lot all day. I said, you know what that comes from? That comes from them being younger, growing up watching TV and seeing people that look like them. It's the simple things that we undermine. I said, now, if they grew up seeing guys with hockey sticks and they looked like them, they were black guys, guess what? Even though there would be more equipment and it'd be more costly, you would see all these black kids in the hood playing hockey. Representation is key. Why do you think all these black kids coming out the hood, they want to be rappers? They growing up on YouTube watching rappers, having their way, as it seemed, things like that. Moving on. Unfortunately, Wells died of kidney disease on March 25th, 1931 at the age of 68, leaving behind an extraordinary legacy that was not immediately recognized with the honors it deserved. Her funeral in Chicago drew large crowds, but national obituaries often underplay her significance. Yeah, that's why I had to preference this in the beginning. Like, to me, she was Rosa Parks. Well, she literally was Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks, but she was Rosa Parks times 10, right? It would take decades before her contributions received appropriate acknowledgement in mainstream historical accounts. Influence on civil rights movements. Though Wells died before the modern civil rights movement emerged in the 1950s and 60s, her work provided both tactical and intellectual foundation for these last efforts. And by the way, when I'm talking about Rosa Parks in that way, that's no way to minimize or disrespect her. It's just that she's highlighted and shadows Ida B. Wells greatly. You get what I'm saying? Her emphasis on documenting injustice using economic pressure and appealing to international opinion anticipated strategies that will prove effective for later civil rights leaders. Her emphasis on speaking plainly about violence against black Americans helped create space for forthright discussions of racism, impact on journalism. Wells pioneered what would later be called investigative journalism. She made her own niche, her own genre, so to speak, which is amazing, combining statistical research with compelling personal narratives and clear moral purpose. Her approach to using journalism as a tool for social change influenced generations of reporters, particularly those covering civil rights issues. Her willingness to risk her safety to document hidden injustice established a powerful precedent for journalistic courage. 1970s, historians and activists worked to restore Wells to her rightful place in American history. Biographies, documentaries, and scholarly works have illuminated her extraordinary contributions, leading to numerous honors. In 1990, the United States Postal Service issued a stamp in her honor as a part of its Black Heritage series. Schools and buildings have been named for her in Chicago, Memphis, and other cities. In 2020, nearly 90 years after her death, Wells received one of the most significant honors when she was awarded a special citation Pulitzer Prize for her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific and vicious violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. This recognition from journalism, highest honor, underscored her pioneering role in investigative reporting. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Wells' legacy is the continued relevance, her clear-eyed analysis of how violence maintained racial hierarchy. emphasis on gathering and publishing facts about injustice, and her understanding of interconnections between racial, gender, and economic oppression offer enduring insights for contemporary movements for social justice. Ida B. Wells' life demonstrates the extraordinary impact one courageous voice can have when it refuses to be silenced, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Ida B. Wells in historical context. To fully appreciate Ida B. Wells' significance, we must understand her in relation to her contemporaries and the broader historical movements of her time. Wells worked during a particularly regressive period in American race relations, the post-Reconstruction era, when many of the advances made after the Civil War was being systematically dismantled through Jim Crow laws, disenfranchisement, and racial violence. Her voice was distinctive, but it exited in dialogue with other important black leaders of her generation. Wells maintained a complex relationship with Booker T. Washington, the most prominent black leader of the late 19th and early 20th century. While she respected Washington's educational work at Tuskegee Institute, she fundamentally disagreed with his accommodationist approach to race relations. Washington emphasized economic self-improvement and temporary acceptance segregation. Wells insisted on full political rights and direct confrontation with injustice. Their differing approaches represent a fundamental strategic debate within the civil rights movement that continue to resonate today. Her strategic use of graphic details to confront public denial all find echoes in current approaches to documenting police violence and other civil rights abuses. Modern movements like Black Lives Matter reflect Wells' understanding that exposing violence against black bodies is essential to challenging the system that permits such violence. I read in this one book, I'm not going to give it to y'all because you guys got to pay for something. If you pay for something, you will take it more serious. I'm not going to give you this book for free, but in this book, it said that police brutality, unaliving of, African Americans was at its height either in 2022 or 2023. Her international approach to civil rights advocacy, appealing to the audience outside of the United States to create pressure for domestic change, anticipated a global human rights framework that would develop in the later 20th century. Wells understood that racism was just not a domestic problem, but one that affected America's international standing, an insight that would later inform Cold War era civil rights strategies. So another thing, if you guys don't know what Cold War is, it's pretty much just verbal. It's just a bunch of shit talking. Excuse my language, but that's all it is. It's not violent. It may be violent in speech, but it's pretty much like the people that seem like they about to fight, but they just talk a bunch of mess. That's Cold War in a nutshell. Principal voice can establish against seemingly insurmountable odds. You like this video, comment, like, subscribe. It's Heff.